This is part 7, chapter 7 of What If the Kamado Siblings Parted Ways. Link in description. I haven't posted in a while, but I'm back for more. If you enjoy this fanfic, what if, then like, comment, and subscribe for more. Chapter start. Branching Paths by Skyward Strike. Chapter 7, Arrival at Kaigara. Head to the town of Kaigara to the far south. Tanjiro remembered his white crow landing on his arm and declaring to him one morning a couple days after his encounter with Kanao and the two demon assassins, "There. A dangerous demon is said to be in hiding." The crow hadn't been kidding when it said it was far south. It took another couple days of traveling just to get to the place in question. But now, as he made his way down the road, set to arrive soon, he couldn't help but to think about his destination. It was a seaside town from what the maps told him, and silly as it was, Tanjiro had never once seen the ocean. He was born and raised in the mountains after all, and had hardly ever wandered out of them until fairly recently when he went off on his journey. It was curious that, for all the crazy things he'd done as a demon slayer, something so simple seemed like a new experience to him. He wondered silently if it would be as vast and endless as the stories described. His answer would come soon enough as he finished making his way a steep hill, and would find himself atop a cliff overlooking the town. "Oh. Wow." Tanjiro couldn't help but to exclaim then as he took in the sight before him. The place itself wasn't particularly large per se, but far from something one would call a village either. Still, the streets below were clearly buzzing with lots of people. Though the tall houses that surrounded it and the numerous wide and narrow streets around the place made it seem like a labyrinth from where he stood. Interestingly, the town extended itself towards the see-through massive piers that even held some smaller houses atop them. Most impressive of all though was the sea itself. Much like he'd been told, it was like a massive lake which extended all the way to the horizon, and even well beyond that. The afternoon sunshine reflected in the endless blue, only disturbed by the occasional wave. He stood there, eyes fixed on the ocean for a solid minute before his daze was broken by a familiar caw. He looked up briefly and would see a white shape circling the air high above him. Narrowing his eyes, he brought his middle and thumb fingers up to his mouth and let out a sharp whistle. He then raised his arm and waited before, as expected, his messenger crow landed on it, the one he'd since nicknamed Shiro for the color of his plumage and a lack of a better name. "So, is there something you can tell me about this place before I go in?" he asked the bird. Opening its wings, it let out a caw before proceeding to respond. The town of Kaigara started as a small fishing village, but has since grown into a plentiful town, becoming a popular spot for merchants to stop by in their travels as well as many visitors, especially at this time of year. Nearing the Ryujin festival that celebrates its founding and the deity their ancestors worshipped. I guess that's why it's so filled with people," Tanjiro noted, glancing down briefly at the city and the movement in it before turning his attention back to Shiro. "Still. Are you sure there's a demon hiding in this place?" Another demon slayer by the rank of Kino was already previously sent out nearby in a mission. It caught out. His body was found days later washed up in the beach just a few miles from the town by his messenger crow. A hole had been punched clear through his chest. "Kino, that's the second highest rank," Tanjiro said warily. "I guess that does mean something demon-related is going on in here. Well, I might as well go down and have a closer look." "Thanks, Shiro." The crow would only nod its head briefly, before flapping its wings and flying off. He'd head down from the cliff through a pathway to the side, and after some walking would find himself entering the town of Kaigara. The outskirts, as he'd find out, was nothing special. But after some more walking lead him to the inner city, he would rather quickly find out that, well, to put it simply, a place like this wasn't exactly Tanjiro's habitat. The number of people roaming the streets, combined with the tall buildings, most of which separated only by somewhat narrow streets, made for a somewhat claustrophobic experience. It got better though, as he'd eventually leave the series of cornering streets into the main road. While it was still very populated, it left more space to breathe. And not only that, but it was filled with merchant stalls at both ends, selling a variety of items, from miscellaneous things such as masks and children's toys to different types of food. Like for example a grilled squid on a stick. That one seemed particularly odd for Tanjiro, given that he'd never even seen a squid before. There was even a man juggling 3 lit torches at once in one corner, sustained by the change people left for him in a small can. He'd keep on exploring the busy town, still somewhat surprised with the sheer number of people and different things all going on around him. He could actually see how a demon could slip in and take someone from this crowd without anyone noticing. If anything, it wasn't a badly thought out hunting spot. Regardless, Tanjiro planned on putting an end to that soon enough. It was a variety of new smells too, most overpowering of all being the constant smell that almost served as a background to anything else there. It was hard to place on what it was though. With some time to kill before night came, he decided to try and follow that smell, and after some more walking, he'd leave the crowds of people and find himself in a fairly wide beach in between 2 of the city's large piers, one leading out, of course, to the sea. Right. The sea. Tanjiro thought then, that's what I smelled. He'd keep on walking into the beach, and soon enough find himself sitting at the sand watching the waves crash. The ocean really was vast, stretching out far beyond the horizon, but not forever. Somewhere out there, there would be more land, with more people in it, different people with maybe similar lives and similar issues. Or not. And past that there would be more seawater, and past that, who knows? If you ever allow your pride to guide your actions, Tanjiro, remember this. He could almost hear Yorichi saying sitting in a tree stump while he laid in the ground near breathless after a particularly intense training session, we are small people. In a small land, in a world bigger than we can even imagine, and even then our stories are but seconds compared to that of humanity's as a whole. It might seem like a harsh truth, but I always preferred to view it as somewhat reassuring. No matter the pain we inflict and are inflicted upon, humanity has always gotten back up and kept on walking. In a way, I suppose that even reflects my hopes for you. Compared to everything else you taught me, that one seemed like another throwaway piece of wisdom, Tanjiro thought to himself, but I can't say I don't somewhat understand you, master. With the peaceful sounds of the waves at the background and the soothing smell of the ocean, Tanjiro would go on to meditate for a few hours. But reopen his eyes in time to catch the sun setting over the ocean. He would just sit there and enjoy the landscape for a while longer, until the sun had fully faded into the horizon, at which point he rose back to his feet. Enough lousing around then, he told himself, time to start hunting. Leaving the beach and heading back into town, Tanjiro would notice how, despite him being there for hours, the movement of people really hadn't changed all that much. He noticed though once arriving at the large road downtown that the man previously juggling torches had been replaced by a young woman playing the biwa. He stood there for a bit, listening and watching her strum the strings playing a soft melody, and ultimately decided to leave some change he could spare for her, which was received with a grateful nod. He stood there watching pleasantly for a moment, before suddenly pausing as his nose twitched. Amidst all the people roaming there, he had caught onto a somewhat familiar smell. He didn't even notice at first since it was faint, but it steadily grew stronger and sparked some recognition again. He couldn't quite place this one, but it was definitely from someone he'd met before. A smell he instantly didn't take much to, because while not nearly as wretched, it reminded him to that of a demon. Tanjiro blinked in surprise as this detail finally seemed to jog his memory, and he'd immediately turned to the side to turn face to face with its source. Just as said source violently bumped into him and had him stumbling slightly. Last time he'd seen him, he was about as tall as himself, and though only a month had passed since the final selection, he'd somehow since gained a good 5 centimeters on him. Not to mention seeming a lot burlier. But he couldn't forget those scars, or that weird half-buzzcut, and especially not that seemingly permanent pissed-off look. It was the same boy whose arm he'd almost broke when he tried hitting those two children at the conclusion ceremony. Not only had he grown taller, but he was now sprouting a demon slayer uniform, with a purple yukata over it. The scarred boy tried walking away, but wouldn't get far when Tanjiro placed a firm hand on his shoulder and prevented him from doing so. "I take it from that bump that you recognize me too, and that you obviously hold a grudge," he said, trying to be amicable as the boy glared at him from over his shoulder. "But we're both demon slayers now, so if we're both here, it must be for the same reason." The boy slapped the arm off his shoulder though. "And what if we are?" he asked with a grunt, turning away. "You must be deaf if you think you heard me asking for any help." He continued walking, to which Tanjiro sighed in slight frustration, but followed him regardless, keeping pace. "We're both hunting the demon who took down Akino. It might be dangerous going into it alone," he pointed out, trying to convince the taller demon slayer. "I don't care who or what this demon took down. You're talking to a future pillar here, so something like this shouldn't anything more than a small fry to me," the boy stubbornly stated. "Now go away, I don't need you following me around like some stray dog." Tanjiro pursed his lips somewhat annoyedly, continuing to follow him. "Look, you're not listening, he cut himself short, suddenly sniffing at something. "Oh, damn. Demon." Without another word, he took off, leaving the perplexed taller demon slayer, calling out with, "What did you just say, demon?" But by the time he'd finished his sentence, Tanjiro had already run off. It was early, very early. From his experience, demons wouldn't strike in such a populated center until at least the early hours of the morning. For one to be so close in a place so filled with people showed how arrogant it had grown using Kaigara as its feeding grounds. The thought alone frustrated him, and fueled his drive as he rushed into the more narrow inner streets, following the smell in a restless dash. He'd take a series of turns, left, right, then another left, and so on. But soon enough, the scent would begin growing stronger, until he'd finally find himself led to an isolated alley in between streets, and that's where he'd find his target. There the demon was, covered in hood and cloak and holding a terrified woman against the wall with a hand covering her mouth. As soon as he arrived, both would immediately take notice of him. The woman would turn her desperate crying eyes over to him in a silent plead, while the demon would glare at him from underneath the hood, messy black hair and wild-looking eyes facing Tanjiro, not to mention the veins in his skin. Weirdest of all though was the mark on its face. Similar to a tattoo, a thick green line was located under both of its eyes and across its nose that ran up vertically into another, shorter horizontal line on its forehead. 4 large dots were also placed at the far ends of the line on its cheeks, the middle of the one on its forehead, and below its lower lip. Immediately, he already comprehended that the demon itself didn't look too inhuman, which probably aided in traversing the town without drawing too much attention. What really caught him off guard though is what he could tell by smell alone. This one didn't exactly qualify for a powerful demon. It didn't seem as weak as the kind you'd find mostly roaming around Fujisakane for those taking the final selection to slay, but it wasn't much stronger either. Not that he had the time to concern himself about the specifics given to him by his crow right now, not with someone in danger. "Let her go, demon," Tanjiro snarled, gripping the hilt of his katana. "Another demon slayer," the demon noted, his expression growing somewhat worried, before he yanked over the woman, wrapping a hand around her neck. "If you take another step closer I'll kill this bitch." Tanjiro only rolled his eyes at that, before moving in a blur, to which the demons widened its eyes and backed away, letting go of the woman. Nonetheless, he received a large gash on his throat from the white Nichiren blade, and should he have been another moment slower, it'd have been his whole head that ended up slashed off. The woman had stopped her sobbing, and was looking at Tanjiro in shock. He didn't even turn to face her as he said, "Get away from here, I'll handle this." She only nodded, still shocked, before running off and leaving Demon and Demon Slayer to face off. The demon stood there, glaring at him angrily as the wound on its throat healed, while Tanjiro faced him with his raised katana. The moment the woman took a left in the alleyway's corner and was out of sight, the swordsman moved. Only, being aware of his speed now, the demon moved as well, suddenly leaping up to one of the walls, clinging onto a window's ledge and jumping off again over to the rooftop. Tanjiro only cursed under his breath, and followed after the demon, leaping as well and planting a foot on the same ledge to give him enough impulse to grip to the edge of the rooftop and climb over as well. The demon had gotten a head start on him, and was already jumping over across the narrow street to another rooftop, but Tanjiro gave chase nonetheless, increasing his breaths to give him the needed energy to try and catch up. He moved after it, leaping over across rooftops himself while steadily closing distance after the fifth rooftop. The demon would glance over its shoulder and realize the demon slayer behind it was beginning to catch up. Panicking slightly, it would land atop another roof, but suddenly veer left and run along its side. Tanjiro would quietly curse as he mismanaged his jump and was forced to land on the other side of the roof, sliding down slightly before being able to regain his bearings and resume his chase. The demon would eventually reach the edge of the roof and jump off again, this time over one of the larger roads with several people walking in it, though no one really paid much attention to what was happening above. Regardless, to get across the road, the demon thus had to jump far higher than usual just to get across, and seeing this, Tanjiro would suddenly speed up, taking a deep breath in. Once reaching the edge of the rooftop, planting his foot on it and rocketing himself into the air across the large road as well. However, rather than leaping up high like the demon had, he'd opt to jump straight across, roughly calculating his angle so that, rather than just chasing it across the road, he'd instead intercept the demon while both were midair. It wouldn't notice until Tanjiro had his hand on his hilt and was moments away from reaching it, which proved to be far too late as both the demon's legs were separated from it at the knee, making for a rough landing when it hit the side of a roof and crashed down to one of the more enclosed roads, causing some panic amidst those who happened to be nearby, though they quickly dispersed. The demon groaned, pushing itself back against a wall so to be able to sit and perhaps even regenerate his lost limbs, except for when Tanjiro landed right before him, quickly swinging his white blade and stopping just short as the tip reached its throat. "I was told there's a strong demon taking people in this town," he said, "but that clearly isn't you. So then, who?" The demon grunted, raising its chin as the katana's edge scratched at its neck. "You don't know who you're messing with, Demon Slayer." It spat out, "You should just sheath that sword of yours and leave town now. Do that and just maybe the boss might let you live." "A boss, huh? I take it you don't mean Muzan Kibutsuji here." He pondered, "So that means you're working under another demon then? You filthy human. You're not even worthy of saying that name. You are beneath his attention. But not beneath the boss's." It snarled, "He'd crush you like the bug you are. Just like the other demon slayer." The demon's badmouthing would be interrupted when Tanjiro brought his katana up and silently slashed it across the face and over his left eye, causing it to hiss out in pain. "Quiet, now," he said, lowering the blade. "I guess your boss is the powerful demon I'm looking for here, if he was the one to kill the Kino. That isn't enough to scare me though, especially if this so-called boss had other small fry-like to help in wearing them down." Quote. The demon chuckled amusedly, "You say that. But you underestimate the Tetsuki gang. The boss is no normal demon." It warned him maliciously, "You're facing off against an actual demon moon now, chosen by the master himself." Tanjiro would widen his eyes at that piece of info, and the demon grinned. "Not that you'll ever meet him." He then cried out as both his legs regenerated then and he pounced at the demon slayer, who blinked and raised his blade, only to never even get a chance to swing it as the demon's head was suddenly blown apart with a loud bang. Smelling a mixture of burning gunpowder and Nichiren, Tanjiro would look to the side and see the same scarred boy as before, holding before him a small shotgun, with smoke coming out of the barrel. With the demon at his feet now dead, the swordsman would angrily turn to face him. Why did you do that? I had it all under control. The hell you did, the scarred boy told him with a snarl. That demon was about to pounce on you. You're lucky I was around to deal with it before you got hurt. You don't understand, Tanjiro exclaimed. I was getting information from that demon. He isn't the one we're hunting, but there's something really odd going down in this town. Apparently, his boss is the one who. Look, I don't care for your detective work here. He snapped then. I'm a demon slayer. I find demons, and I kill them. The specifics of what happens in between doesn't concern me at all. Hearing how dismissive and unhelpful his fellow demon slayer was being at the moment started at this point to really annoy Tanjiro. Look, I don't care if you don't like me and want to work alone on this, but if you're going to get in my way while I'm trying to be a proper demon slayer, then we have a problem here. The boy grimaced then as he began walking up to Tanjiro. Then, the fuck do you mean, a proper demon slayer? He inquired with a snarl, grabbing and tugging at him by the collar of his kimono. You trying to insinuate something, short stuff? Tanjiro only narrowed his eyes. Let go of me. Or what? You gonna stare me down, till I let you go again? He asked mockingly. Well, I'll tell you something, that kind of shit doesn't work twice with. He was cut off then. Tanjiro headbutted him right in the face, knocking the taller boy down to the ground with his hand quickly covering his bleeding and broken nose. I swear. He sighed, sliding his blade back into its scabbard. People like you is what's wrong with this whole institution. He began walking off then, leaving the boy and his newly broken nose behind, glaring at his back with a mutter of, hard-headed bastard. Not too far away from where the two demon slayers were, another demon nervously observed the interchange hidden in the rooftops above. With a brown-colored version of the facial markings the demon just slain moments ago had on his face, this one stood under 5 feet, but was stocky. With gray skin and ugly mole-like features as well as messy dirt-brown hair, wearing only a sleeveless top and pants, and with his larger arms providing a strong contrast with his smaller legs. The demon, known as Ryusa, was currently nervous after seeing the demon that had been recently taken in by the Tetsuki gang, Tsukai, brought down by 2 demon slayers. He'd been watching since he and the red-clad slayer were having an interrogation session, and had seen the second slayer arrive to kill Tsukai when he attacked. As well as the following argument between the two. Ryusa didn't know how lucky he was to be downwind from the two, as well as far above in the rooftops, otherwise his scent would have been caught on by then. Either way, he didn't waste much time watching more, as he knew immediately he had to report what he'd seen to the boss. Weeks ago, another demon slayer had gotten too close to their territory near the beaches of Kaigara when hunting down Tsukai. The boss had intercepted the slayer and killed him, as well as saving Tsukai and letting the lower demon in as a rookie member of their gang. Much like Hinamaru had said though, the demon slayer corps didn't leave what was well enough alone, and had indeed eventually come to poke their noses into their doings. The boss had ignored it though, said not to worry, that with his status as a lower moon, nothing short of a pillar was enough to bring down their gang. That didn't mean Ryusa wasn't worried though. As he'd just seen, demon slayers around meant dead demons were a real possibility. Tsukai would have attested to that if he were alive to do so. Regardless, his best chance now was to go back and report on what he'd seen. With that in mind, he'd leap off the rooftop and down to the ground, using his demon blood art to soften said ground and sink into it. Digging through it and quickly traversing underground, making his way towards the gang's home base. The boss would know how to deal with this. After his scuffle with the scarred boy, Tanjiro found himself wandering around the town in frustration. Mulling over the little information he'd gotten while wishing he'd been able to force more of it from that demon. At least he knew there was a whole gang of demons hidden somewhere in this place, led by an actual demon moon, unlike the drum demon he'd met at that old mansion. That was still so little though. What rank in the demon moons did this boss hold? How many were in this Tetsuki gang of theirs? And most importantly, where was their base of operations? If only that gun-happy idiot hadn't been around to mess this up, he could have known all that and more by now. His line of thought was interrupted when he felt his stomach growl, and suddenly realized he hadn't eaten at all since breakfast that morning, before he'd even arrived at Kaigara. Sighing, he'd decide to switch his priorities and go look for some food, leaving the whole demon problem for later. Soon enough, he'd return to the main road, and after some wandering, find himself in front of a modest ramen restaurant. Wow! That smells amazing, Tanjiro thought, feeling his mouth salivate. Without further ado, he'd make his way inside the restaurant, and take a sit by the counter. "I'll have the miso ramen," he'd tell the cook, and leave some yen to pay for his meal. It wasn't until he sat down and took his mind off food that he realized he felt another familiar smell, and a strong one at that. Another odd scent, one that reminded him of the smell right before a massive thunderstorm. Looking off to the side, he'd be surprised to see a blonde boy clad in a yellow haori with sad golden eyes staring down into his plate of ramen, as well as a bright red hand mark on his cheek. And not only that, but he too wore the demon slayer garbs beneath his haori, plus a katana sheathed by his waist. Despite not having shared a single word with him, he recognized the boy right away as another passer of the final selection, the one who'd received a sparrow instead of a messenger crow. Why do I keep running into these people? Tanjiro thought, immediately deciding not to engage with conversation with this one. Not after how his last meeting with another demon slayer had just went. Then again, this was evidently a bigger deal than what he thought it would be, with a demon moon and an entire demon gang now involved. If he was sent out there for the same reason, which he probably was, then this blonde boy could end up proving very helpful, unlike the one with the scars. Different people, different results, after all. Plus, he was somewhat curious about the mark on his face. "You look like you had a tough day," he said, trying to start a conversation with the boy beside him. The boy blinked, looking over from his ramen and over to Tanjiro beside him and widening his eyes in surprise for a moment before finally speaking. Yeah. I actually tried to confess my love to this one really pretty girl, but she completely rejected me." He looked down, once again downtrodden. "She even slapped me and called me a delusional weirdo. I really thought it was meant to be." "Oh, so you broke up with your girlfriend then?" he asked sympathetically. "That's rough." Oh, no, she wasn't my girlfriend," the boy clarified then. "I'd just met her earlier today, but she seemed really nice. And she was really pretty. I really thought we were meant to be together though." Why is every demon slayer I meet end up being a weirdo in some way or another? Tanjiro couldn't help but wonder to himself, sweet dropping. "I can't say I'm sorry for you," he admitted then. "To be honest, that strikes me as a bit creepy, even." The blonde boy then turned to him, suddenly bawling his eyes out. "That's so mean. How can you say that? Just because I met her today doesn't mean I can't really like her right away. Ever heard of love at first sight?" He whined, suddenly speaking very rapidly, and even when Tanjiro tried getting a word in, he just continued, "Besides, I'm a demon slayer. Most of us die before we reach 20. I can't find love if I don't take some risks. I know it's a dangerous job, but I really don't want to die of fear." He was suddenly silenced when Tanjiro placed a hand over the boy's mouth, most of the people present in the small restaurant now staring at the two of them. "Okay, let's forget I ever said that," he sighed. "Let's take it from the start. My name is Tanjiro Kamado. What's yours?" "Yeah, I know," he admitted, his bawling suddenly dying down. "I'm Zenitsu Agatsuma. It's nice to properly meet you." Tanjiro would raise an eyebrow. "You know." Zenitsu blinked, and looked down sheepishly. "I remember you from the final selection. When those guys confronted you about not having a sword, or your talk with that other kid about having his katana, or your fight with that one weirdo with the boar head." You listened to all that? He asked, surprised, before pausing. Wait, that last one didn't happen in the final selection. How do you know I fought that guy? Zenitsu looked even more sheepish now after his little slip. I might have been close by, hiding from that guy, behind a bush. He confessed, getting quieter with each ellipsis. Right, Tanjiro muttered, trying to overlook that part. I guess that means you were also sent here after the so-called powerful demon in this town. Well, I don't know much about any powerful demon. I just followed my sparrow all the way here. The blonde boy narrowed his eyes, but if you're looking for help, you probably realized by now I'm not gonna be able to give you much. He blinked. What do you mean? You're a demon slayer too, aren't you? I'm not like you, Zenitsu admitted with a sad smile. It's clear you're a reliable demon slayer. You took down the boar guy without harming him too much and saved that other boy from a demon. I'm too cowardly. Too weak. I'd only be dead weight for someone like you. Tanjiro looked at him for a moment. That's not true though, is it? He asked, and the boy looked at him in confusion before he clarified. Sure, you might not exactly. But I could tell it from the moment I noticed you. He looked at the boy then, and though it might be a contradiction to everything he'd seen of this guy so far, he said something he knew from gut instinct alone. You are a lot stronger than you think, Zenitsu. Zenitsu must have caught onto the honesty in his voice, because he looked surprised by how genuine that statement came out as. Do you really think so? He asked somewhat hopefully. Yeah, of course. Tanjiro assured him. Sure, you have some stuff you obviously need to work on, but I really think you have the potential to be a great demon slayer. Realizing the boy beside him meant what he said, Zenitsu only stared at him in silent shock for a moment, and couldn't even figure out what to respond to him in time. As Tanjiro's miso ramen soon arrived, and he opened a small smile, breaking apart his chopsticks ready to dig in, you should eat too. He advised, before your ramen gets any more colder. Oh, the blonde boy murmured then, only then being reminded of the meal before him. Right, of course. He said, breaking apart his own chopsticks. And though Tanjiro was too distracted by his own food to notice, there was now a small smile on Zenitsu's face as well. Elsewhere in the town's underground, the demon known as Ryusa would emerge from the floor, the soft ground beneath him quickly hardening back to normal. He rushed through the enclosed corridors, using his arms to gain some speed when his smaller legs wouldn't get him as far. Finally, the dark enclosed corridor opened up into a massive room filled to the brim with random junk, mostly piles of boxes and scattered remains of both human and animal in the form of numerous bones, all solely illuminated by some dim light bulb above the room's entrance. No sooner did Ryusa enter the room that another figure landed right in front of him, a tall and lanky demon taking the appearance of a young man with slicked back red hair. He wore a scarlet kimono with white square patterns scattered throughout it and had pale yellow eyes accompanied by a wide smirk. Of course, like every member of the Tetsuki, he also done a red version of the tattoo on his face. Why, if it ain't Moleface himself? Back from digging around tunnels around town, the demon asked mockingly. Ryusa glared at the demon before him. Get out of the way, Nobiru. I gotta talk to the boss urgently. The boss can't be bothered to deal with innocuous things just like that. A deeper voice spoke as another demon stepped out of the shadows. This one was even taller than Nobiru, a bald man with gray slitted eyes, standing over 6 feet, and with a fairly normal complexion. But brutish features such as a flat nose and sharp protruding lower canines protruding like tusks. He wore a featureless brown kimono shirt with loose black trousers. Much like the rest, he had the same tattoo on his face, his colored blue. You can just tell us, and we might relay the message. It's not innocuous. Ryusa turned his glare at the other demon. Being by far the weakest between them, it was easy to be respected by those guys. What I have to say is important. Crucial, even. I'll only tell him face to face. You heard Hinamaru, short stuff. Nobiru grinned. You can either tell us or go back to digging whatever hole you came out of. Stop it, you two. A third voice suddenly said, a young-sounding one too, and all three demons turned to look into the darkness, where hidden by the shadows. A figure sat silently above a piles of wooden boxes neatly rearranged to look like a throne. What do you have to tell me, Ryusa? Boss. Ryusa stuttered, as both Nobiru and Hinamaru stepped aside the moment their boss spoke. If nothing else, Ryusa could understand why they acted like that before that demon. He had been part of the gang for half a year, and yet talking to the boss like that never failed to make him nervous. There are demon slayers in town. They even killed Tsukite, and they are looking for you. For us. More demon slayers, the boss said with a hint of annoyance in his voice, and just on the day of the festival too. They'll no doubt be ruining our chances of taking more humans. What an annoyance, he sighed, before rising and leaping down from his makeshift throne, landing on the ground firmly and beginning to walk towards them, but I suppose we'll have to deal with it. It's certainly a nuisance, but it'll be over quicker if we just take them down quickly one by one. Worst case scenario, I'll deal with them just like I dealt with the last one. Finally stepping into the dim light, a teenage-looking boy with incredibly pale skin would emerge, his face decorated by the same tattoo as his underlings, only his being black. He had dark brown hair with bright orange tips that were worn swept back but fluffed out on either side of his head and neck. Alongside a white haori with a yellow scale pattern down the sleeves, as well as a white button-up shirt and dark hakama pants. Last but not least, his eyes were cat-like in shape, the pupils slit and the irises pale blue with a white ring around the sides. Most importantly of course though was the kanji for Lower Moon 6, engraved onto the one on his right. After all, they are no pillars. The boss, also known as Kamado, stated, now, who's ready to hunt some demon slayers? End of Part 7, Chapter 7. If you enjoyed this fanfic, what if then like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you in YJ next What If. Peace out.